In 1999, on his wedding day, Prince Edward was handed a promise instead of a title. Every other son of a British monarch who married got a dukedom on the spot. Andrew got York. Charles already had Wales and Cornwall. But when the Queen's youngest son stood at the altar with Sophie Rhys-Jones, he stayed plain old Prince Edward. No dukedom, no title upgrade, nothing. Why? Because his parents had already decided, quietly, years earlier, that Edward would get something bigger, but only after his father died, only after his eldest brother became king, and only if that king chose to honor a promise he never signed his name to. That promise sat untouched for 24 years, through his father's death, through his mother's death, through his brother's coronation. And in March 2023, it finally came true, but not in the way anyone in the family had planned it decades before. This is the story of how Prince Edward became the Duke of Edinburgh, why it took so long, and why the title he now holds will disappear the moment he dies, something that has never happened to this dukedom in 300 years. To understand this story, you have to go back to 1947. That's the year a young naval officer named Philip Mountain married Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne. On his wedding day, King George VI created him Duke of Edinburgh. It was a fresh title, brand new, made specifically for him. Philip would go on to hold it for 73 years, longer than almost anyone has held any British title in modern history. Fast forward to the 1990s. Philip and the Queen are getting older, and they start thinking about what happens to that title when Philip is gone. Under the normal rules of inheritance, a dukedom passes straight to the eldest son. That meant, on paper, the Duke of Edinburgh title was supposed to go directly to Charles, Prince of Wales. But there was a problem. Charles already held two dukedoms, Cornwall, and, eventually, he'd inherit the throne itself. Giving him a third title he'd only hold briefly, before it merged back into the crown anyway, felt like a formality nobody really wanted. So the Queen and Prince Philip came up with a different idea. What if, instead, the title eventually went to their youngest son, Edward? Edward was the one who seemed to want it. He'd actually worked for a production company early in his career that specialized in historical documentaries, and by several accounts inside the family, he felt a real personal connection to carrying his father's title forward. The problem was, you can't just hand out a title early. The rules of the peerage don't work that way. A duke has to actually die, and the title has to actually pass through the legal line of succession before anyone new can be granted it. So the family did the only thing they could do. They made an informal promise. When Philip dies, the title would first legally pass to Charles because that's how the law works, and then, once Charles becomes king, he would create Edward the new Duke of Edinburgh as a fresh gift from the crown. It was a plan with an enormous catch built into it. It depended entirely on a king who didn't exist yet, keeping a promise he never made himself, at some unknown point in the future. Prince Philip died on April 9, 2021, at the age of 99. Exactly as the legal rules required, his titles passed immediately to his eldest son. Charles, who was still Prince of Wales at that point, technically became the new Duke of Edinburgh the moment his father died. Royal commentators covering the death that week were already looking ahead, telling reporters that the title was expected to eventually make its way to Edward, but only once Charles became king and the title reverted to the crown. That's an important detail people often get wrong. A title doesn't just transfer between family members whenever someone feels like it. It has to legally merge back into the crown first, which only happens when the person holding it becomes the monarch. So Charles held the Duke of Edinburgh title for about a year and a half, right alongside being Prince of Wales, waiting for his own mother's reign to end. Then, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died. Charles became king. And in that exact moment, the Duke of Edinburgh title his father's title, the one Edward had been waiting for since before his own wedding, dissolved back into the crown. It was, for the first time in 75 years, sitting empty, available, waiting for a decision. And here's where it gets interesting, because Charles didn't act immediately. Months went by. There was a coronation to plan. There was a grieving family to manage, along with the very public fallout from Prince Harry and Meghan's decision to step back from royal duties, plus the ongoing fallout from Prince Andrew's disgraced exit from public life. The new king had a lot on his plate, and reviving an old promise about his youngest brother's title clearly wasn't the top of the list. royal watchers started to wonder publicly whether the promise would even be kept at all. Some pointed out that Charles, as king, had no legal obligation to follow through on an understanding his parents had reached decades earlier. He could have just as easily left the title vacant, or given it to someone else entirely, or folded it into the crown estate permanently. Nothing in law forced his hand. Edward, for his part, said almost nothing publicly during this period. He and Sophie continued their usual round of royal engagements, arguably one of the most active working combinations in the family, without a hint of the title conversation happening behind palace walls. The wait ended on March 10th, 2023. It was, fittingly, Edward's 59th birthday. Buckingham Palace released a short statement. King Charles III had conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on his youngest brother, Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex and Forfar. Sophie would become the Duchess of Edinburgh. For a moment, it looked exactly like the ending everyone expected. The promise made in the 1990s, honored a quarter of a century later, on a symbolically perfect date. Headlines around the world ran with variations of the same story. Edward finally gets his father's title. But buried in that same announcement was a detail that changed everything, and it's the part most casual coverage completely glossed over. The title was not made hereditary. For the first time in the history of this specific dukedom, the title of Duke of Edinburgh would only exist for one lifetime, Edward's. When Edward dies, the title does not pass to his son, James. It does not pass to any of Edward's children at all. Instead, it reverts straight back to the crown, exactly the way it did after Philip's death, and it will sit there until a future monarch decides what to do with it all over again. This was a genuine break from 300 years of tradition. Every previous creation of the Duke of Edinburgh title, going all the way back to 1726, when King George I first created it for his grandson, had been hereditary. A normal dukedom, once granted, is passed down through the family like any other inherited title, generation after generation, as long as there are male heirs to receive it. Charles chose not to do that. So why would a king deliberately break with 3 centuries of precedent on the exact title his own father made legendary? The most widely reported explanation centers on Charles's broader philosophy about the size and cost of the monarchy, something he'd been vocal about for years before becoming king. Charles has repeatedly signaled a preference for what's sometimes called a slimmed-down monarchy. Fewer working royals, fewer titled family members drawing public attention, and in some cases, public money, and a tighter core of senior royals carrying the institution forward. A hereditary Duke of Edinburgh title would have guaranteed that James, Edward, and Sophie's son would inherit a senior royal dukedom the moment his father died, regardless of whether James wanted a public royal role, regardless of what the monarchy looked like by then, and regardless of what future kings might prefer. By making the title non-hereditary, Charles kept that decision in the crown's hands. Whoever is king when Edward eventually dies gets to decide fresh whether the Duke of Edinburgh title should exist at all, and if so, who should hold it. There's also a simpler, more personal reading floating around royal commentary circles. James and his older sister, Lady Louise, were both deliberately raised outside the full spotlight of senior royal life. Edward and Sophie made a point of keeping their children largely out of official royal duties growing up, letting them pursue ordinary educations and, in James's case, an ordinary young adult life outside constant public scrutiny. A non-hereditary title fits neatly with that same instinct. It lets Edward carry his father's name forward for his own lifetime, as a personal honor, without locking his son into a role he never asked for. Either way, the arrangement leaves Prince Edward in an unusual position among his royal relatives. He carries one of the most historically loaded titles in the family, tied directly to his father's 73 years wearing it, but he's the only holder of it, ever, who arrived on the throne's terms alone, and the only one guaranteed to be its last. This arrangement raises a genuinely interesting question that royal historians have started asking out loud. What happens to the Duke of Edinburgh title after Edward? Legally, nobody knows yet, and nobody will know for certain until it actually happens. When Edward dies, the title reverts to the crown, exactly like it did twice before, once after Philip, once after Charles became king. At that point, whoever is sitting on the throne could choose to recreate the title for someone else entirely. It doesn't have to go to James. It doesn't have to stay in this branch of the family at all. A future king or queen could revive it for a grandchild, a niece or nephew, or simply let it sit unused indefinitely, the way plenty of older, rarer titles across British history have quietly gone dormant. Some royal commentators have floated the idea that Prince Edward's grandson, or a future son of Prince William, could eventually be considered for it, precisely because the title is now detached from any automatic inheritance rule. Others suggest the crown may simply retire it for good once Edward's tenure ends, treating it as a title that belonged, in spirit, to Philip and briefly to his youngest son, and nobody else. What's clear is that Charles's decision has effectively turned a 300-year-old hereditary dukedom into something closer to a lifetime honorary title, similar in spirit, though not in legal category, to how some other royal designations are handled on a case-by-case basis today. It's a small but real signal of how the monarchy under Charles is willing to modernize even its oldest traditions, quietly, without fanfare, buried in the fine print of a birthday announcement. For Prince Edward personally, none of this seems to have diminished what the title means to him. Those close to the family have described it, in various interviews over the years, as something Edward genuinely wanted, not for status, but because it let him carry forward a title so closely associated with a father he clearly admired. Getting it non-hereditary, after waiting 24 years, was still getting it. Step back, and this whole story is really a story about how modern the British monarchy has quietly become, even while wrapped in centuries-old ceremony. A promise made privately between a mother and father in the 1990s, a legal system so rigid that even a reigning king can't simply hand out a title on command. It has to pass through exact, unbroken lines of succession first, a 4-year gap between a death and a decision. And finally, a king willing to honor his parents' wishes in spirit, while rewriting the legal terms entirely to fit his own vision of a smaller, more deliberate monarchy going forward. It's easy to reduce royal title stories to simple headlines: who got what, who was denied what, who's feuding with whom. The real story here is quieter and, honestly, more interesting than any of that. It's about how an old institution handles a promise it can't legally guarantee, across a full generation, through 2 deaths, a change of monarch, and a coronation, and still finds a way to keep its word, on its own terms. Prince Edward now holds the same title his father wore for 73 years. He's the 4th person in history to hold it, and when his time with it ends, for the first time in 300 years, the title won't simply move on to the next generation. Automatically, it'll go back to the crown, and back to a king or queen who wasn't even born when the promise that started all of this was first made. That's the real story behind Edward's dukedom, not a denial, not a scandal, but a 2-decade promise, kept on entirely new terms. If you found this breakdown interesting, let me know in the comments what royal title or tradition you'd like covered next. There are a lot more of these quiet, overlooked stories buried in the family's history,